Building on hills and city skylines can be a challenge. Even with years of experience, making it look nice is even harder. Filling empty lots and steep slopes is a pain in the ass, but it doesn't have to be. If you're new here, my name's Diana, and welcome to Cascadia Bay, a modded series set in the Pacific Northwest. Today, we're returning to the city of Astoria to fill out some of the areas just above downtown and complete the South Slope neighborhood on the southern end of the city. To start, just across the main highway, I'm adding in more high-density residential buildings, creating a couple of thin layers of height along the roads that follow the curve of the terrain. I'm using this gigantic key wall as a retaining wall. It's very finicky to work with, but to get a good transition, I've hid the end of it underneath an elevated road segment. I'm developing the hillside in a series of blocks at different elevations, using my terraforming tools liberally and evening everything out, and then placing the buildings to get a general idea of where everything in each block should sit. Along this particular block, I'm working on a small high school, as the neighborhood is primarily residential, adding in a soccer field in the back and using Move It to get the heights in a way that is reasonable. The detailing of the school campus is simple, with some parking lots, pedestrian paths, and a few trees to fill everything out, and a fence around it to define the area as a coherent place. For many of these uneven areas, I like to use sort of boxy, chunky apartment buildings. These tend to handle uneven terrain well, as they can easily be blended together with Move It. Further back, I'm working on the road network even more, making sure that everything follows the terrain at a gradual slope when possible, and bringing it to naturally fit into the more gridded layout along the waterfront. The further up the hill I got, I switched to lower density single-family homes, again, somewhat ignoring the terrain and just getting a general guide to quickly fill out these spaces.
Clap your hands and you'll feel stronger. Tomorrow you get another chance. Don't blame yourself under the circumstances. Tomorrow you'll get another chance. Take control of your feelings. You know you've been dreaming. Where are the loving words? Where have all your sweet dreams gone? Wipe that frown off your face.
Along the waterfront, I'm continuing the medium to high density mix of offices and residential units that I started working on when I built the initial parts of the South Slope neighborhood in episode 3 of this series. I wanted to give this area a somewhat upscale but still urban feel, sort of tapering off slowly, becoming less dense the further away from downtown you get. With access to the tram line and being so close to the water, I thought this would be a great place to add in the tram ferry hub asset and some offices directly in front of it. And then I extended the tram line to meet up at the ferry stop. This ferry line goes to both of Cascadia Bay's other cities, Arcadia to the west and Avalon to the north. And with its easy access to the tram line, commuters from both of those cities can transfer easily to reach the denser parts of Astoria. For the surrounding areas, I continued to fill in blocks of high density from the waterfront up to the hills. This would likely be an extremely desirable place to live, with its views of the river, so I imagine it would be densified quite quickly. So it was at this point, I was stumped with what to build. I didn't really know where to take the series from here. I felt like we've needed to fill out a lot of Astoria already, but I just got up in my head again, trying too hard to make something that'll please the algorithm gods or tell a delightful, engaging story. But then I just decided to say screw it and let's build this thing live. So we've got all these blocks here that are very hilly, very difficult to work with. And I just want to remove quite a bit of the trees here. And what we're going to do is look at this terrain. And this terrain here, there's really no reason for anything to ever be on it. But we're not going to let that stop us. Because it's unlimited money, it's modded, we can kind of do whatever we want with Cascadia Bay. And that's always what this series has been about, is really just trying to make a nice looking place. It's going to be realistic, but at the end of the day, how realistic can a video game city be? So I do like to play with a lot of move it to get the heights just right. And when I'm building in hilly terrain, I don't let the contours be set in stone, especially on these maps that I've made myself. Like, we can play around with it to make it work with us and still make a good looking area. Still make a place that feels very hilly and very organically laid out without having messy terrain features like that. That doesn't look good right now, but we can fix it. 32 degrees, look at that. That would never happen. So we even it out. So this is Network Multi-Tool. 10.6 is still very, very high for a slope. I just want to level out as much of this as I can to make it look reasonable so that we can place some sort of buildings here. And you'll see I'm kind of making these terraced leveled pads, and then in between putting in trees. I feel like that really covers up some of this ugliness, but also gives you lots of terrain to work with. So some of the stuff here, yeah, I don't know how that got there, but we want everything to kind of be a coherent enough theme. And the ones I've really been liking for this area are what's called the boomer houses. I don't know why they're called boomer houses, but they look very Pacific Northwest. They look like they would fit this theme like they would be in Oregon or somewhere similar. But they're also just generic American suburban enough that they can kind of fit everywhere. And what I like to do here is just use Forest Brush with my Vanilla Pines and come in and kind of fill out these areas. So on this side, we're gonna do mostly the boomer homes. And I have them all here. They're different sizes. I'm gonna use the Alt-V hotkey to do random. I have it mapped to Alt-V, but it might be different for other people. But if you push it, it randomizes whatever's selected and find it here. So I have the word boomer searched, which is just these houses. And I can randomize them like this and just place them here, here, here. And I'm gonna keep that going for a little while here. Now, you may be wondering, why the hell am I doing this? It's so steep. It's obviously not liking that at all. And it's making a mess. Well, there's a lot we can do here to cover a lot of that up, and that's what we're gonna do. This area is sort of about making the terrain respect us as opposed to respecting the terrain, but making it look like we've respected the terrain. So I'll just place the rest of these homes in here and fill out the ends of the block. I'll show you what I'm gonna do next. So next I want to place a pedestrian path in the middle here, and this will help sort of fill out some of these weird empty spaces. I turn off all of my angles, I leave Road Anarchy on, and I just kind of make it through here the best I can. And it's gonna be okay if we go sort of over those, because we're gonna clean it all up. The main reason I don't do live plays of Cascadia Bay like this at all is because it's so slow paced. It'll take you literal hours just to do one thing in this game. And sometimes the terrain doesn't cooperate with us, and we don't really need a path there. But for here, I think that's gonna be okay. And we can just sort of move it around and play with it to give it a little more realism, so it's not just like off the side of a hill like this. But here, that's probably not gonna be possible. So we'll go back and we'll actually just put the path right here. And then I'll just bring it through in a couple little key areas. So it's like residents have a place to sort of walk around and hang out behind their lots and go hiking in these hills. And then behind it, this is when I cover everything with a very dense layer of trees. Because it's the Pacific Northwest, you're gonna see lots of these kinds of conifers and pines anyway. And these sorts of residential hillside areas, I feel like it's okay for them to be sort of low detail. They're not gonna be seen other than from far away in cinematics, and it looks good. And this, it's still not great, but we can still cover that up a lot. And this is how I make nice looking spaces relatively quickly and easily. And this will add so much to the background and to the layers of height from the city. So if you look over here, now it looks a little less empty. There's trees everywhere, but you can also see houses and places where people live. And we're gonna go up these hills a little more. But first, I wanna fill out all of this area here. Now, I could just zone this out and forget about it and let it grow according to the demand. I can even use mods for zoning. I could use District Styles Plus, I could use unlimited demand, all of that. But I don't really like to do that. It feels like I'm gambling and that I'm gonna get buildings I don't like. My preference has always been to just go through it, take it nice and slow, and plop things one by one. Very simple and easy. Like something like this house is beautiful, right? And normally I'd say, yeah, let's keep it there. It's great. But for a neighborhood like this, there's no props, there's no detailing, there's no fences around it. I could add those. For a neighborhood like this, I don't want to spend the time on it. So I'm gonna go back to Big Suburbs here. And Big Suburbs is another one I use a lot. It's a little more traditional American style suburban housing, but it looks really good kind of in these semi-urban, just outside of the city center type places. So like you're very close to downtown, right? You can see it, there's office buildings practically in your backyard, but it's low density. So I like them for that because they look kind of historic, like they've been around there for a while, especially these level 1 big suburb houses. And I like these ones kind of with the big lots. There's hundreds of these houses to choose from this pack. It's so extensive. And I think it also matches well with the Pacific Northwest themes. You'll see a lot of these kind of houses in like Oregon and Washington, which this is Astoria, so it's Astoria, Oregon. I know it's new for y'all to see me a little more casual with my modded builds, but I wanted to try something different, kind of similar to what we do with Sandy Beach. And so I just go through here and one by one place them, and they go well with the boomer houses along this road, and it's very tedious. And there's a reason so many of the modded players, including myself, do time lapses. Do you want to sit here and watch this whole thing over and over again? I'm sure you do. I'm sure you'd love to spend that time with me, but we can only show so much. So I'm gonna time lapse the rest of this. I'll see you all in a sec.
If you keep this up, then I'll let you in, 'cause you have a way with me like no one else. Yeah, you almost make me fall in love. Yeah, you.
And so now what I've done here is I'm actually gonna bring this out to here so that we can have enough connectivity with everything. But I do want it to come back into this grid right here because we do have somewhat of a grid still going here. And I'm gonna put my road guidelines back on like this. And right there, at that last node before it curves, we want these two to meet up. So let's look at our terrain here. And it's not too bad. So we can make this happen and we can make this work, but we are gonna need a little help. So let's see what we can do. Bring this up a little with Network Anarchy. That way it's not too steep of a drop. And now we can bring it down, pushing page down and make that connection right there. So what you'll see I've done is gone from an organic layout up here in the hills to not a perfect grid, but a somewhat more gridded pattern along this street here and along the waterfront. So along this area of Olney Avenue is what I've called it. It's actually a real street in Astoria, kind of in this place in the real life Astoria. So what we're doing is I've planned for sort of it to taper off into these more like office locations. What I'm thinking is that this area is more of like the tech hub of the city. So we're looking at more IT services, maybe some tech startups, sort of Silicon Valley-ish. And going really for like just south of San Francisco, you're looking at like San Mateo or maybe Redwood City, something like that, where there are these very suburban offices that have been taken over by large tech companies. You see like Facebook down there and Apple, Google, all of that. The way I'm doing that is I'm making still these sort of mid-rise glass office towers with lots of parking. Because that's what you'll see in these kinds of areas is lots of office structures that maybe carry a lot of workers, but they're also very auto-oriented. Now, of course, we have the tram going here. And that's great. And I think we're going to keep that and not make this city too car dependent. And it's already not that bad. It's already pretty good. It's got an excellent subway system, excellent tram system. So I'm going to use parking lot roads, and we're going to make a couple of these, probably just one right there, just the largest size right there. And I'm actually going to have to move it over a tiny bit. I'm using Move It and I'm holding Alt and it keeps it straight. So I have both of those nodes. The other thing parking lots hate is differences in height. So we're gonna get this whole area here just a little evened out, maybe like that. So that way we have a flat pad to work with. We might duplicate these office buildings so that they match. Yeah, but what we'll do is we're gonna use Move It to rotate it like this and have them face the parking lots so that workers can go straight from their car to their job. And I got them pretty close. What I can do to get them evenly aligned here is I can go into Move It and hit Line Up Objects. And as you can see, they're pretty much perfectly aligned. So I did a good job. So now for these parking lot roads, I'm sure you've seen me use them a million times, but if you're new, you make the road and then you have to install the parking spaces. And I have a mod called Parking Lot Snapping, which makes it really easy to do. So I like to put the accessible spaces kind of close to the door, because in real life you'll see that, because so if anybody has those needs, they can get to the door first and easily without having to lug their wheelchair across the parking lot or walk across the parking lot or whatever it is. I just like to make it easy, and that's also more realistic. It's like ADA stuff, I believe. So I'll usually keep a couple close to the door here, and then sometimes the parking lot snapping, as you can see, it's not perfect, but this one will work. So we may have to do a little bit of extra work with this to make it right. So usually a little difficult when you have stuff in the middle. That's okay. What I like to do is use Move It and then move all of this over. And so those accessible spaces are still pretty close to the door here. And now we can just put in these spaces and lock them in. And then we'll probably use the single space to fill these up. And then that's one end of the parking. What we can do, which will make it easier, is just copy this over here. Same thing with Move It. You just push copy there. It's this button. And then we'll place it. And this one, it looks as a little uneven. So we do need to add an extra space. And that's not too hard. These are a little off here, unfortunately. So we'll just do that. And then in the middle here, I think we'll need 4x2. And then we'll put some of these on each side. I think this is enough spaces all together. On this side, we're a couple short, but that's okay. And because of where I've placed everything, these aren't gonna be perfectly aligned, but that's okay. You'll see that in real life sometimes too, where the parking stalls don't match up exactly. So we wanna detail up the parking lot too. We'll use some planters. We have this, and I think this is a great one because we can place it very closely here and kind of duplicate it like that. It's pretty close, and then we can just copy it right there. And there you go. It's not perfectly even or aligned, but that's okay. Doesn't have to be. We can just work on it and bring it close here, and same here. And that way you've got some kind of greenery there going. So now I've got a planter tree, but we have a problem. And I want to put trees here, but it's not going to let me because we have this new game mechanic. Well, it's not that new anymore, but we can no longer place trees using even like tree anarchy when there's a road segment because it thinks that it's a road segment that needs trees. The one workaround that I've found for this is if I place a tree, say here, and then I use Move It and bring it over, sometimes it'll work. Sometimes, not always. So we need to turn on tree anarchy. Let's try that again. Now it works. So you have to have tree anarchy installed to make this happen. But all I'm doing is copying these trees with Move It and placing them in there. Really simple. And in the back here, we're gonna do a little more detailing and make these feel kind of park-like. There's sort of like a back patio or courtyard that people go to eat their lunch, but I do want it to still lead to the street, and then we are gonna sort of fence this off. I don't know which fence to use yet, but I'm thinking oil industry fence, so let's do that, because this has like a really nice sort of business-y vibe to it. It looks like it would be the outside of an office park too, so that's what we're gonna go for. And then if I can't get it perfectly straight, I usually use Move It to clean it up. And in here, we're gonna put a few benches. I'm thinking just some basic picnic type benches, or we'll go with the prison tables. Office jobs feel like prison anyway. They're not as bad as prison, but you know, they have a lot of the same amenities. Oh, prison gives you a gym though, and prison pays for your meals. Offices usually don't, but these sorts of tables here, they look nice. And that gives workers a place to kind of gather and eat lunch. And I really like these spruce trees, so we're gonna put a couple of those. I think something like that maybe. Ooh, those are nice. So we'll do that. And we'll sort of play with these to give some landscaping around here. And these blue spruces are my favorite, but I don't think they're gonna fit there. Maybe on the outside here. That's what I'm gonna do. So out here, I'm just gonna line this with some trees to give it a little more to make it look a little less empty and dead. And we'll keep that going here too, with the same blue spruce. And then here, I really like that planter tree I was using in the parking lot, so I'm gonna redo those there. And then I am going to even out these props a little bit with Move It. I don't think they have to be perfectly aligned. You'll never see anything perfectly aligned in real life unless it was made by a robot. So there we go. And then I really like the junipers. They are one of my go-tos for sort of lining fences and closing off spaces, but I'll just do one on each side. And then that's just a good way to just simply and basically detail stuff. It's not fancy. There's not a lot to it, and you don't even need a lot of skill to do something like this, but the end result looks really nice and simple, and I think that's what matters. So for the other side, we don't have quite as much room, so we're just gonna continue the junipers here, because we don't have quite enough room to do a courtyard back here in behind this building. And then on this side, we'll go back to a different piece here. I have these planter networks that I use a lot, and I think that would look really pretty right there. Let's see. Yeah. And even though we've already got trees lining the street, I think there is some value in having these. And I don't like that it snaps to the fence because these are technically classified as fences. We'll get rid of that tree. And we'll just go like that. But there we go. So that's one set of offices done. What do we put behind it here? So behind this, again, there's not a lot we can do with this. And then back here, we're gonna continue the big suburbs theme, just taking what we get with Alt-V. If I don't like it, I can always do something else. I can always move it, I can always change it. But sometimes at the end of blocks, I'll want everything to face the street, and I could play with zoning and do the whole zoning toggler, but I just like to use Move It, and it's pretty simple like that. With this one, I think it needs to come back a little bit. And I do like that the trees sort of bleed into the people's backyards like that. It makes it feel very forested, like this is a forest city. It's not a desert. It's not barren. It's very wooded. And that's kind of true to life for the Pacific Northwest in general, it is very wooded, even in the urban areas. You'll see it in Seattle. There's tons of trees, and Portland, Tacoma, even Astoria, like there's tons of trees everywhere, and they're usually sort of these pine trees. So we've got one more space here that I really do need to fill out. And I could go low density, but I'm thinking we'll keep the high density going, even if it does sort of break down here grid-wise. So the ones I really like are these modern eco townhouses. They do really well with this hilly terrain because they're very square, and it also matches what I did here. So these are very square and very you'll see, sometimes you have to use Move It to splice these things together. And these, because they're such a similar style, they sort of fit together, and that can create the effect of a layered singular building. Like right here, unfortunately, there's not much I can do about that door sort of being way off the sidewalk. But with this one, I can at least bring it down, and then these two kind of can go together. And what it creates the effect of is like this has its own little balcony, and this apartment here is ground level. And that's another trick I use with hills a lot, is just to find similar enough buildings and bring them together and splice them together. It gives me like San Francisco vibes. That's very common in San Francisco to have a lot of attached buildings very close together, but they're still freeform, freestanding structures. And a lot of times you'll see them built in a similar architectural style too, because they were built in the same time frame. And even these, they're super cute. I don't know why it did that. We'll fix it. And it's gonna look pretty terrible for a minute. And this is both hilly and on a curved street. So it's gonna be a little more difficult to build on. But I like these two because they don't snap to the zoning grid, they just kind of snap to the road. So they're a little easier to place too. So I'm not aware exactly of who made these. Let's find out. Doesn't say who made them. Well, whoever made them did an amazing job. And then this is sort of larger townhouses. I think it'll fit. And then one more of these little guys in here. And again, this is more like sort of background filler area. And what I might even do is use procedural objects here. And this won't function. I mean, there's ways to get it to function with block services, but what I'm looking to do is sort of turn this building into a more angular building. So how we do that, we're gonna go more, we're gonna distort. I'm gonna use my right mouse click to go like this. And let me move that. Oops, push Control Z. So the menu is kind of hiding what I'm looking for here. So let's get closer. So I was able to get the building sort of dragged here. It's still not perfect. So what we need to do is get the back here and do the same thing, because we want this to sort of fit into this tight space here. And I'm gonna drag this back a little bit. And I'm gonna drag this side too. And what we're creating is an angled building like that. And then I'll click edit and I'm at position. I'm gonna drag it down a little bit and drag it this way, just a little bit. And there, it's not perfect, but from far away, it just looks like a coherent block of buildings. And then behind here, obviously this isn't good. This looks fake, this looks artificial. What I do is I just do the same exact buildings on the other side. And then this block might be a little too wide for it. But what we can do is let's try to put a small road in between here. Let's see if I can get it through. And yes, that's exactly what I was trying to do. And that obviously looks like garbage. It's fine, we'll figure it out. What I do to figure that out is I play around with things. I move things to my will with this Move It mod until it looks presentable. Sometimes you get weird stuff like this, but what I can do is, let's say I really like these little guys. What I can do is I'll use Move It and I'll rotate this around with the right mouse button, and we can pull this in, page down, and now it's pretty much covering that empty space and just sort of looks like another layer to the same apartments. And I'll do that here too. Turn that off. This one probably needs to come up a little bit. And then what we'll do here is we'll move this road so it's not so in the way. And now we've got a little alley for these apartments. And you'll see this a lot in San Francisco and Seattle. In fact, in a previous life, I was a Uber driver in San Francisco, and they did shit like this. There was like little alleys and little hills and little buildings all smashed together. So this isn't just some like City Skylines hack that I'm like, oh yeah, this is how it is just because of the game. No, this is stuff I see in real life. Like even those giant sort of concrete bases there, like you'll see those. Those are not unrealistic. What is unrealistic is some of that terrain there. But again, I'm not gonna worry about it too much because we can cover it up like this. So I'm using procedural objects again. I'm pushing Shift P to convert the buildings into a procedural object, which then gives me access to do sort of whatever I want with it. And what I wanna do is actually move it down so it just sort of looks like those are windows to apartments. And if I hold Control while I use the position button and I drag it like this and then I let go of my mouse button, it makes an exact copy. And that's great right there. So now it looks like we've got these like steps and layers of buildings, and we can do that with PO the whole way if we want to, and it'll look really cool. So I'm gonna time lapse the rest of this, but I wanted to pop on and say hi and show you a little behind the scenes about my process when I'm building these detailed areas, because there's so much I don't show on camera. There's so many creators don't show on camera. So let me go ahead and get this area filled out.
Acabé aprendiendo a mentir. El día llegará que no encontrarás ni siquiera un alma perdida.
Offices, the need for educated workers naturally arises. South Slope College is a highly rated trade school where students are prepared for careers in engineering, law enforcement, or travel and tourism. I thought the proximity to the offices and good public transit made a university a compatible use. But I had to flatten much of the terrain and reroute some of the existing road network to make sure everything fit in well together. I made a deliberate choice not to go into too high detail with this campus, keeping it somewhat simple and understated, as I don't imagine this is the most prestigious university in the region, and more of a community college focused on preparing local residents for careers.
But I'm not gonna settle my
For the waterfront area in front of the campus, I used some creative ways to hide the uneven terrain. For the riverbank, I continued the use of river rock props along the shoreline and used quay walls along the side of Olney Avenue to hide the ugly slopes behind the office buildings that I placed. If this is your first time watching my content, I do a variety of video types, from heavily modded builds to satire to vanilla tutorials. If any of that is your thing, start here. And as always, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more episodes of Cascadia Bay.